Welcome everyone to the Stride Leading Through Adversity speaker series. This is our 5th of 10 planned speeches. We are doing 10 speakers for 10 topics over 10 weeks. Really, as we looked at this time we're in with the COVID epidemic and the economic uncertainties, and now the upheaval that's happening across the country, we wanted to give people an opportunity to hear from experts in their fields about what do you do when things are going in ways that you never could have expected, and how do you really lead through uncertain times. My name is Michael Kelman. I'm Director of Product and a Principal Consultant at Stride Consulting. And just a minute on Stride Consulting before we get started, for those of you who are unfamiliar. We're a consultancy that work with companies, both large and small, and we help them develop their product and engineering teams and help them use technology to solve their business problems. So we work with early stage companies that are looking for partners to build their first release, up to multinational enterprises that are looking for coaching and upskilling of teams. And our focus is always on helping you become more effective to deliver better outcomes for your business. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome David Siegel, who is the CEO of Meetup, former CEO of Investopedia, and also a good friend, just coincidentally. But he's going to speak today about pivoting when your business model gets upended. And I'm sure there will be some fascinating stories to hear about Meetup and how it's been weathering all the recent changes. Just a logistical note, the way that we've been running these is the speaker, David, will speak for around 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So if you have any questions during the talk, just add them to the chat. And then when we get to the question period, we'll open the chat and we'll call on people and unmute you so you can ask your question. Please stay on mute during the speech so we don't get background noise. And if you put it on speaker view, you should see David's presentation. So without further ado, David, do you want to?
Yeah, I haven't put my presentation on yet because I'm going to see people, talk to them first, and then I'm going to put the presentation on in like 1.5 minutes.
Great. So I'll just go to speaker view then, and we can all look at you, and you can start talking.
Awesome. Yay. Hello, everyone. So I would say, imagine talking about leading through adversity. Imagine if your entire business is all about in-person connecting, and you have 15,000 events every single day that are all in person. And for your 18-year history, you have basically declared that in-person is where it's at, and anything that's not in person and anything we're all about using technology to get people off of technology. And now we had to use people to get them back onto technology. How does that fit with the soul of your company and what your company stands for in a situation where having in-person events is so beyond dangerous for people from a safety perspective? How do you still keep your mission and thrive as a company? So a lot of adversity there, to put it lightly, and I'm going to share some slides, and we'll share some slides. It'll be very non-conversational and one-sided slides, and kind of hopefully not too boring. And then we'll have some more interesting conversation in Q&A afterwards. Michael, I'm so excited that your brother Ari Kelman is on from Israel. That's quite a beautiful thing. Hi, Ari. He and I are in a fantasy baseball league together. So this is how we have people join. So I just wanted to first share with you the story about how Meetup was started. First of all, just quick show of hands for all the people that are actually showing their faces, which is like 4 of you. So let's make it more than that. Who here has ever been to a Meetup? Raise your hand. You ever been to a Meetup? Okay, Ari raised his thumb, and so did Arjun, so thank you. Okay, so you may or may not know this, but Meetup was founded directly as a direct result of probably the largest tragedy and crisis in our time prior to this pandemic, which was 9/11. Right after 9/11, our founder, Scott Heiferman, had seen that people were obviously beyond distraught around the tragedy, and people started connecting and talking to their neighbors in ways that they had never connected or talked to their neighbors previously in their entire lives. And he met all these people that he had never met before that lived on his floor, and he didn't even know them beforehand. And he said, like, it shouldn't be a tragedy and a crisis that it takes to bring people together and to have people meet up together as groups and to build community around it. And he basically said, there's a better way. And it was on that that he created Meetup, and he's been the founder and the inspiration for the company. And then I took over as the CEO about 1.5 years ago when Meetup was a part of WeWork. So now I am going to show you a video. Who doesn't love videos? It's only 1.5 minutes or 1.25 minutes. Don't worry, it's fun. Now, and then we'll get started. Sound great? Thumbs up. Woohoo! Here we go.
A lot of awesome runners here this morning.
Before you even exchange the word or two, your body starts exchanging chemicals.
I move agile, I reflect on self, I iterate. That's what
best when we get out there with real people in real life. And that is what Meetup is about. There's a loneliness epidemic out there. I'm sure you know about it, and hopefully none of you have personally had to experience it, but likely with the number of people here, there are a number of you who have. According to a recent poll, 46% of adults regularly feel lonely. 46% of adults regularly feel lonely. And that challenge around loneliness is only significantly greater, sadly, around people who are in their early 20s, their mid 20s, their late 20s. And you can see how there's quite a significant difference between people in their 50s and 60s and people in their early mid 20s. And that makes the epidemic of loneliness, which people have said, loneliness is equivalent to someone's health of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, from a kind of health statistic standpoint. Even more scary when you think about the younger generation and the loneliness epidemic that exists. 25% of people can't even say that they have not even one trusted confidant that they can go to in a time of personal challenge or crisis or joy and happiness. Not even one person. That's up from only 10% just a decade ago. And 89% of people said that in their last social interaction, they're in some way, shape, or form interrupted with technology. Just like some of the people on this right now are being interrupted with technology as we're talking. Yep, I saw you look up. The most important KPI that we have as a company at Meetup is this 30 million number. And 30 million represents the number of hours of, in 2019, in-person human connections that we facilitated as a company. And that's something that is an incredible mission. And just to get an idea of what we have, who we are, we have 50 million members worldwide across 330,000 meetup groups in 190 different countries, with 15,000 events a day or 100,000 meetup events a week in over 2,000 cities. That's a little bit about meetup, and I consider myself so fortunate. So we talked a little bit earlier about the kind of adversity that we experienced. When I remember in February, when the COVID was in China and then moving to Italy, and we started looking at our data in China, and we said, oh my God, our events in China are down 90%. And then in Italy, they were down nearly 100%, especially Northern Italy in particular, Milan, down 100% when COVID hit. And we said, if this gets to America or the US or some of the other countries that were particularly strong in the UK, France, et cetera, COVID can be the epidemic, can be the pandemic that actually kills meetup. And it came to the US, obviously in early mid-March, and our numbers literally went off a cliff. Our RSVPs went down by 70, 80% in the span of just literally a week. Our events went down in a week. No one became new subscribers to Meetup. It was like overnight, just a total cliff happened. And oh, by the way, at the exact same time, in late March, WeWork was in the final path of selling Meetup to an investor named AliCorp, someone named Kevin Ryan, who I've fortunately known for 22 years, and brought him into, he and I worked together at DoubleClick and brought him into the business. But we had the dual-sided situation at the exact same time of COVID being the pandemic that could destroy one of the greatest public goods I think the internet has brought to the world, which doing, I think, more than anything else in helping to really help and cure the loneliness epidemic. And we were in a sale process being sold out of WeWork, all literally within weeks of each other. So what did we do? We dug deep and we said, okay, we need to understand our mission, we need to understand our values, and we need to figure out, based on that, what we're going to do, and we're not willing to sacrifice our mission or values. And our mission is to empower personal growth through real human connections. And here are some of our values that you could read. I think it's worthwhile. I'm not going to read them to you because that would be boring. But you could read some of them. Trust and transparency. About access to information allows us to debate, align, and act. Collaboration thrives in clarity because we know transparency builds trust, and trust is the foundation to open communication. When we had to build, these are values not just between employees and employer, but they're values between our 50 million members, our 330,000 group organizers, and how we approach our business. And we took a step back and we said, what are we about? Are we about in person, or are we about building community? And the answer is we're about building community. And we said, right now, the only way to build community and to keep connected is to have online events. So we literally got the entire tech team together and said, okay, what can we do as quickly as possible, because Meetup was possibly going to die in the middle of a sales process, to change that. And within 2 or 3 days, we acted extremely fast. We focused on impact. We certainly invited change. We tried to lead always with integrity. And we enabled, for the first time in our 18-year history, for people to be able to conduct online events effectively at scale. And we rolled out a very imperfect product in terms of our pivot. An MVP in a business that has 50 million members is complicated, to say the least. And we saw some incredibly exciting results. So in the 3 months since COVID started, we've had over 500,000 online events created from zero. We've had over 330,000 been hosted, and obviously more are going to be hosted for the ones that were created. close to 4 million people RSVPing to online events from 0. And there's people that have been RSVPing across 190 countries around the world. And then what we did is we looked at each of the categories of Meetup. And some categories are very conducive towards online events. And as you can see for tech, it's like, oh yeah, tech, we could do that online. And I'll provide some specific examples of things that we did. But in our first 18 years, like zero online events. And then in March, we had only 2,000 online events. And boom, we went from 2,000 online events just for tech to 18,000 online events in April to 23,000 in May. And in June, they're continuing to grow. We just don't have the full month yet. But tech is easy. And you would think, okay, tech people, they're comfortable with online. You know, that can work. You have speakers, you have panelists, you know, and actually we started getting feedback from our tech organizers and being like, oh my God, I now just ran a tech event and we had people from 20 different countries show up. That's so cool. We got double the number of people RSVPing and attending our events in tech because it can now be done online. And we never would have done online because we said it's all about in person. And now we shifted it to say, no, it's all about keeping people connected in a safe way. And as long as we're keeping people connected in a safe way, then in person happens to be the best way to keep people connected, but that's not necessarily available for everyone. So we looked at different other areas, whether it's for career networking, which with all of the obviously furloughs and layoffs that have happened over the last 3 months, we saw huge increases there in career networking, but also in hobbies and interests and in social, people playing online games all the time. Michael, the facilitator, has come to numerous game nights at the Siegel family home. And we haven't quite had a game night yet online, but we should. And then there's more support groups are incredibly important to grow, especially during this time. But then there's things like sports and outdoors. And you might think, how could there be 5,600 sports and outdoors, or, you know, almost, you know, whatever, over 11,000 sports and outdoor meetup events between April and May? And the answer is people would go running by themselves and they would have a meetup event where they would get back together and drink a beer after running together. And they would keep their community connected and talk about the runs that they all did kind of independently and separately, and go back and do that together. Or they would organize scavenger hunts or other type of ways to to ensure social distancing and safety. And the fact that there were over 11,000 online events in a couple of months, sport outdoor events in a couple of months, it speaks to the persistence of meetup organizers to say, we are going to prioritize our community. We're going to find ways for our community to thrive, despite the fact that we have this challenging environment. All credit goes to meetup organizers. And if anyone here wants to ever become one, then you can send me a note. So let me share some of the things that we did very specifically. We did a lot in a very short period of time. And I think acting fast is something that that was particularly important in light of the inevitable consequence of not acting fast, which would be pretty much the end of Meetup. So number one is we created something called Meetup Live. Meetup Live is a twice a week opportunity for people to, for organizers to learn best practices on how to, in the beginning, how to host online events, how to keep connected. We have an event, for example, this afternoon. We have close to 3,000 attendees at this event. It's extremely important. It's around Black Lives Matter, how to help dismantle social injustice, and ideally the roles that our organizers can play regarding leading around diversity, not just leading through adversity. And that's something we never did before. And it's a way of educating our organizers around how to share best practices with each other. We had someone from Zoom come and to speak to 3,000 people about best practices and how to use Zoom. Because if you're a 60-year-old organizer, I'm not to say be ageist in any way, but if you're a 60-year-old organizer running a knitting group, for example, you may not have necessarily the same facility with Zoom. So we really tried to educate people on how to be more effective in that, whether you're 60, 40, or 20. We shared some best practices around Zoom, and that had over 3,000 people attending as well. And we shared some examples of best practices around online. So for example, making sure that people understand the power of breakout groups, and scavenger hunts as a way to keep people engaged. Making sure that your agenda is much more specific if you're going to have an online meetup around expectations and what you're planning on to learn and how time should be used. It's actually even more important than an in-person type meetup. Figuring out how to introduce people with fun games and chat games, whether it's 3 words to describe your favorite weekend, your favorite animal, your favorite person at Stride, whatever your favorite thing happens to be. Making sure that there's actually specific roles of different people in an online meetup was very important. So you want a timekeeper. You don't need that as much in person. You want to make sure you're monitoring, have someone that's specifically monitoring chat. You want to make sure someone's making sure that no one's dominating the conversation like I am right now. You want to figure out how the timing can work, because people don't really take as much specific times for lunch these days, but after work might be at 5 o'clock and not 6 o'clock, or at different times, and really think about mixing up the timing. So that's some best examples of many different best practices that we shared. We shared templates, tons of different templates. I'm not going to share them all with you, but we said, okay, what's a template for how to have a more effective online group discussion as an organizer? How can we enable you to succeed? And we shared templates around meditation meetups and yoga meetups and book club meetups and photo sharing meetup events and meetup groups. So we tried to really enable them with some of the best practices specific to their areas that would help them, because what's a best practice for an organizer around running is a different best practice for an organizer that's focused on meditation per se. We created a blog. We never had actually a public blog beforehand called meetup.com/blog, where we shared all these ideas and best practices and articles that we wrote around switching to online events and how to be effective in online, and just tried to, in teaching and educating and learning, it's not about like having one vehicle, but people learn in different ways. And some people will learn better through video, and some people will learn better through written. And we just want to basically, and some people will learn better through templates, and some people learn better through talking and mentoring. And we try to find every possible conceivable way that we could make that happen. And ultimately, the growth was continuing to happen. I'm almost done. I think just 2 or 3 slides left, but I want to share some very specific best practices around pivoting that kind of we learned from this experience, which is obviously far from done. And I'll share what we're going to be doing shortly around kind of something called the Get Back Together movement that we've already started in different cities and countries around the world to get back together kind of post-COVID in safe ways. But some best practices, and we could talk about these in Q&A, or talk about anything you want. But the first is, it's very easy in pivoting to lose your mission and to lose your values, and to take an emergency situation, which is certainly what we were in, and to focus on revenue and profit at the expense of what the soul of your company is. And as one's pivoting an organization based on adversity, you got to dig even deeper into your mission and values and pivot from there. And that's what will make for kind of long-term strategic success. The second is using your UVP. UVP is your unique value proposition. Like, really understand what is your business at its core great at. So for Meetup, we are great at helping to organize events for organizers, help people to attend events that the organizer wants, and help individuals to find events that they're interested in. Well, all that can be done online, just like they can be done in person. Understand your UVP, understand your unique value proposition, and make sure you, again, dig from that as kind of the core focus of your business. The third is that if you operate as a leader completely independently, you're going to lose the most important group, which is your employee population and your management team. And you have to act fast, but you also have to make sure you're getting buy-in. And the key to buy-in isn't necessarily like democracy and voting. It's making sure that people understand, so you can move fast, the context for decisions, the why behind the decisions, and why we need to move quickly, and why we need to make certain decisions happen. It isn't a democracy, and you need to be comfortable directing a pivot if required to do so. And I would say I hate the word but I was very directive in saying we need to move to online as quickly as possible. And very few people disagreed, but we didn't wait a couple of weeks to see how people would vote on it. But we acted fast, but we also ensured kind of buy-in from employees. The next is, obviously, Stride is a tech business, but Stride is also a strategy business. And trying to find non-tech solutions to be able to pivot fast. All too often, especially Meetup, a company that's been around for 18 years. Last week was Meetup Day, which was our 18-year anniversary from when the site went live. It's very easy to look at challenges around tech debt and challenges that disenable the ability to kind of pivot fast. And it's the job of us as managers and leaders to understand that there's many ways in which one can pivot with non-tech solutions, whether it's creating Meetup Live, whether it's creating templates, whether it's marketing, whether it's emails, whether it's the blog that we created, and then small tech levels of effort can go very, very far. The next is understand how much easier it is to pivot a business when the business is smaller. It is incredibly hard to pivot the big giant ship of 1,000 people, 500 people, multiple hundreds of people, and understanding that a reason to become smaller as an organization isn't necessarily to save money, but it's to move faster is something that leaders should be extremely cognizant of. And then finally, I teach at Columbia, and these are 2 required readings in my class. Maybe we have some students, former students of mine, that are on this as well, which would be fun. But reading Lean Startup has an incredible chapter on pivoting. Reading Running Lean, which is another kind of a compendium to Lean Startup, and also has some very strong suggestions on pivoting. How to do so effectively is something that I would also advocate for. To wrap up, we are now in the process of our Get Back Together movement, and it's really fun, and it's really interesting. We launched it as a test in our pivot back. So now we're pivoted, and now we're pivoting back in 3 countries, areas. We launched in New Zealand, Hong Kong, and China. And already both Hong Kong and New Zealand have more events than they did prior to coronavirus. There's more people attending events prior to coronavirus. This past week, we launched in 16 additional countries, France, Spain, others that are meaningfully more safe than certainly the US is. And we have a 7 to 8 phase step approach. We thought the government was big with 4 phases. We've got 8 phases. And we're going to be approaching the US, very specific areas of the US in a few weeks from now. And we're going to wait to hit the areas of the US that are most hit. Obviously, countries like Brazil and Russia, we're not going to be communicating with about the Get Back Together. But the thing that we are really focused on is how can we incent organizers and make them incredibly excited to be a part of a Get Back Together movement. One of them is to say we're going to be donating 50% of their next month's subscription payment towards Global Giving, which is an incredible organization focused on PPE equipment for any country that hits its goal. And we're excited about all that because actually a couple of countries have already hit their goal, which means probably we didn't set their goal high enough, but that's okay. And, if you want a copy of this presentation, if you don't have our app, you want to download our app, then I encourage you to do so. I'm going to stop sharing right now. If you want to contact me, my email is here. And I'm happy to engage in any kind of conversation about any topics that you like that could potentially be helpful.
Great, David, thank you so much. And we're gonna put up your email on the screen as well so that it will be there for folks to see. And also for folks who look at the recording later. So thank you very much, David. This was fascinating, as I knew it would be. And I'm so glad that we had a chance to hear from you. I know over the last 15 years of knowing you, being friends, I've learned a tremendous amount, and I'm really glad that we're giving other people the opportunity to learn from you as well.
Mostly what not to do.
There's a fair amount of that as well. We'll focus on the positive for now. So I want to open the floor to questions, if anyone has any, and let everyone put the questions in the chat, or if you want to just unmute yourself, you can do that as well. And Shaylin, I'll let you monitor the chat. Tell me if anyone's got one. I've got an associate following your advice already, of having different people with different roles on the call. So I've got someone from Stride who's helping me out with the chat. But while we're letting people giving people a chance to ask questions, let me ask you one of my own. So I thought it was fascinating the way you were describing, Meetup obviously was a company founded on this idea of in-person gatherings, and so your online presence wasn't well structured or formulated or built out before this all happened. How were you able to, in a couple of days or a week, roll out all those resources that you showed us and really pivot, start to generate the sheer mass of assets you needed to get, help to your organizers?
Sure. So the question had come up, so there's like the core functionality of having an online meetup event, and then there's all the marketing communication support that needs to surround that. And so I'll talk about both. The first is kind of the core functionality of a meetup event. We basically said, what is the least action that we could possibly do that will absolutely upset many organizers, but we're still willing and confident and comfortable doing it, even though we know that it will lead to organizers being not happy, and we're comfortable with that. So what was that? It was basically having just the ability in one's description to put in a link to what your Zoom link is. It's like that simple. Add a Zoom link, right? But if you think about it, there's a lot of complicating things that exist in our platform. So for example, something like time zone, which is the most obvious thing, every place for any event would have time zone. But time zone was irrelevant before, because if an event is in Berlin and the only people showing up are the people that are in Berlin, they kind of know what time zone you're already in, right? But now we had people coming to, so we listed like 15 different problems with just having a link. Like, wait, we can't even say the time zone. Like, we don't have time zone information, for God's sake, like on our platform and our apps. That's like crazy. People don't even know what time zone the thing's in. So we literally launched it with confusion about time zone. People would write Berlin time, like things like that in the description. It was just like the smallest possible thing, which is a link to Zoom. And then we started changing things and we started iterating, and we just said, we're going to get it out there and we're going to iterate and we're going to listen to our challenges. So what are the things we had? We had time zone. We made online the default rather than the initial. So if you set something up, it would be default. You couldn't have recurring events, which was a total pain for people. I see Brian Guthrie on here right now. Hi, Brian. And our organizers were like, we need to be able to have recurring events and like restart the entire thing over and over again. So we were willing to launch without that. And then a week later, we added recurring events. So there was a host of like a dozen plus different changes that we had to make, but we were comfortable making those changes iteratively after the launch. So that's kind of in the core kind of functionality, being able to do it online. And we're still adding more and more ways of making online work better, because in reality, online is going to make Meetup better and more successful for every organizer and member. Let me give you a couple of examples, and then I'll answer a couple more. But one is, let's say that you lived before in like a remote area in suburban White Plains, for example, like Michael, and there wasn't that event in suburban White Plains that, let's say, there's Michael loves collecting Pez dispensers, but for some reason his love of collecting Pez dispensers is not shared by thousands of other people that are in White Plains, but it is shared by thousands of other people around the world. So as a member, he can now connect with people around the world who share his passions, and Meetup can now be available for people who are in remote locations all around the world that they wouldn't have been able to be available before. I talked to one of the biggest Meetup organizers in Sydney, and he said, I love online events because it costs people that are in remote areas of Australia like $25, $30 to get into Sydney, to get back. And now Meetup is now available for these people that don't have the money to be able to attend event, to be able to participate and to learn and learn about tech or careers, and they wouldn't have had that access beforehand. Anyway, so it's here to stay. So that was one. And the second is all the support around it. So it was just about scrappy. So willing to be crappy for scrappy purposes in the beginning. So our blog, we had actually intended to create a blog, but we accelerated the focus of the blog specific around COVID once we launched it. For Meetup Live, we had never ever intended of creating a experience, and we that was kind of a live Zoom meeting. We literally within 2 days found an organizer who has experience with online, and he presented something on a Zoom meeting, and now we have, I think, close to 20,000 people who are part of Meetup Live. So that's kind of the long-winded answer to the question of just being willing and able to roll things out quickly. Okay, next one.
Thanks. So I wanted to give some other folks a chance to ask their questions. I think Al had one.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, David. So I think everyone in the audience.
Hey, the first time I got in a car with Al, it was in Edmonton, Canada, and he somehow backed into something and got into and a piece of his car kind of came off. But
David and I went off-roading. It was fun. So I think everyone in this in this chat, everyone's organizations have made changes as a response to this dynamic pandemic situation. In your presentation, you mentioned kind of pivoting back, Meetups doing the getting back together movement. I kind of wanted to get your thoughts or advice on how to make that pivot back effective in a way that we actually leverage the learnings we made during this kind of challenging time to be in an even better place when we get back to whatever the new normal is.
I love it. So a couple of thoughts on that. And this might be very specific to Meetup. So I'll think about how we could globalize each example. But here's one. Online forces certain infrastructure and having to be more structured in an approach to an event, because it's harder to iterate kind of on the fly in online versus in person. But the reality is that the best Meetup organizers are ones that are incredibly structured in their agenda, in what people should bring to the event, in what people should get out of the event, etc. So it's actually helping us to think about what are the ways in which Meetup events needed to become more effective when online, and how do we take those learnings and apply them for in-person events. So we're actually creating a much more structured agenda template for our organizers, rather than just being, here's a description, fill out whatever you want. It's more, there's a description, and what do you need to bring, and where's it? We're being a more prescriptive, shall we say, in our approach to Meetup in-person events. And I think part of that is our ability to have learnings from the online experience and how it can apply to the in-person type experience. And I think that there's every organization, if I want to globalize this, can look at what pivots they had to make in order to make the business more effective. For example, there are businesses that probably had to shut down different projects that were pet CEO projects or pet projects that were not necessarily moving the needle, that were nice to have but not must have. And it forced like kind of greater focus in an organization, the pandemic for most organizations. And the key is, how do you maintain that focus kind of post-pandemic from a company culture standpoint? Another thing that I think is a great learning is from a company culture standpoint as well, is around kind of work from home policies and flexibility around hiring remote employees. And there was already like obviously a trend increasingly towards that. And we have our VP of Engineering, Brian, who's also a big fan of Stride, on the call right now. But our approach at Meetup to work from home and kind of hiring remote employees is going to be different post-COVID than it was pre-COVID. And it's another example of kind of an ability to kind of look within yourself and say, you know, this terrible tragedy beyond, you don't want to say like, what's the silver lining, but it's extremely important for every single organization to kind of look within it and say, okay, what did we pivot? What did we change during this time? What, you know, you work in project management, Al. So what project management processes do we have to implement during this time? And how can we make sure that we apply those and don't get, you know, lazy may not be the right word, but less structured when we're kind of out of this time. And it's incumbent upon all of us to figure that out, because guarantee there's dozens of ways that you could do that. And I listed a couple of examples related to Meetup. Thanks, Al.
Thank you, David.
Al and I also got to go in a hyperbolic, is that what it's called? What's the chamber called?
The isolation therapy.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. Sensory deprivation tank.
Thank you.
So there's a question in the chat from one Ari Kelman, no relation. No, it's actually my brother. Ari, you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Sure. So actually, David, you addressed one of the questions I had, but another question I had, first of all, thank you for the talk. But you mentioned how online growth has obviously had infinite growth because you're starting from zero. I'm curious to know how the online numbers are comparing to what the old offline numbers were pre-corona.
Yeah, great. Okay. So this isn't like public information, so certainly don't tweet about it, but I'll give you just a general range. When first Corona hit, as I said, we were like 80% down in number of events and number of RSVPs. As a business,
David, we are recording it, just so you know.
Okay, good to know. We are slightly, but not significantly, behind in our events and RSVPs in terms of the total number of online and IRL. What's super cool, however, is that the way that the trends are going right now, next week will be the first week which is amazing, where the number of IRL events for the first time in 4 months will be now higher than the number of online events. So what I think is going to, and it's fascinating to look at it by country, like absolutely fascinating. So like in Israel, for example, at one point, 85% of the events were online. And then there was a little bit of a retrenchment because I know, Ari, you live in Israel. And then it went down to like only 50% were in person. And now it's kind of back up to 80% actually again. And there's some fascinating kind of infographics that one could surmise around kind of percentage online versus percentage in person by each of our 190 countries. And at some point we want to publish, and we're going to, kind of a infographic heat map where you could literally look by country and you could see Brazil is still, let's say, 85% online for good reason. But for the majority in the US, we're roughly now 40% or so in person, maybe 45% in person, and about 55, 60% kind of online. But they're overlapping. And if I had to guess, in 6 months from now, we'll end up being something like 80% in person, 20% online, but the total will hopefully be close to double what we were at pre-COVID. I mean, I think the key question is the need for Meetup even greater now? And are people even more aware of the importance of getting together in person now than they ever were beforehand? And what's been so interesting is in countries like France, where the Premier of France said that on Monday, literally everything's like back to normal. And the exception is any kind of changes to that normal that's starting on Monday. We're just seeing the IRL events kind of go through the roof. New Zealand and Hong Kong, as I said, is already kind of higher than it was before. And the aspiration is that the Get Back Together movement, done in a safe way, as I said, can lead to hopefully the biggest thing to happen for Meetup, but more importantly, the biggest thing to happen to help to support communities and in-person connecting, around the world.
Great. Well, thank you again, David, and thank you all for attending. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so I think this is probably a good place to end. As you can see on the screen that we're sharing, you have David's email address. If you have any further questions you want to send to him, you can write to us at stridenyc.com. And also just want to call your attention to the next event in our series, which will be next Thursday. Doug Sunheim, who's an author and a consultant, wrote a book called Smart Risks. We'll be talking about how to take smart risks, right? Obviously, everything David talked about today is about taking risky decisions to change the business model for Meetup, and I think we're all facing some version of that in these days. And it'll be really interesting to hear an expert on taking risks talk about how to do that well. So again, thanks to you all. Have a great day wherever you are. And I think we'll end it here. Take care.
Bye.
David.
Sure.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.